All right. So are you ready to dive into the world of Tim Walz,
Let's do it.
Minnesota's 41st governor? And I know what you might be thinking.
Another politician.
Yeah, like, is this just going to be another, like, run-of-the-mill political bio?
Right.
But I think you're going to be surprised
Yeah,
because we're going way beyond just, like, the resume bullet points here.
absolutely.
This is about understanding how this guy, small-town Nebraska kid,
Yeah.
ends up as a command sergeant major in the military,
Right.
and then somehow becomes the leader of a state known for its, well,
Interesting political landscape, to say the
to
least.
put it mildly, yeah, interesting political climate.
Yeah.
So there's a lot to unpack here.
What I find fascinating about Walz is that his story, like you said, it's diverse, but there's this underlying theme of like seeking understanding
Okay.
across totally different perspectives.
And you don't always see that right away.
Yeah.
It's not every day you meet a governor who spent 24 years in the military.
Yeah.
Rose to the rank of command sergeant major, and then somehow also navigated the world of being a high school teacher.
Right. Like that's not a typical resume.
That's a whole different skill set.
And it's not just about the experiences themselves, right?
Yeah.
It's the skills and the insights he's picked up along the way.
Okay.
Like think about being command sergeant major.
Yeah.
It's not just telling people what to do. He had to earn the respect of his troops.
Right.
He had to make really tough decisions under pressure.
Yeah.
He had to deal with, complex situations, all skills that directly translate to being governor.
That's a really good point. I never thought of it that way. So let's back it up a little bit. Like you said, small town Nebraska, born in 1964,
Okay.
working class roots, family ran a small business.
That's like the classic Midwestern upbringing right there.
Exactly. And you can see that background reflected in his later focus on rural issues,
Yeah.
which I think is interesting because it suggests it's not just like a political talking point for him.
Right. It's genuine.
Like he gets it,
Absolutely.
He's lived those experiences. Those are his roots.
And that ability to connect with people from different walks of life, I mean, that's huge.
Yeah.
But, okay, before we get ahead of ourselves,
Okay.
let's talk about that military career. 17 years old,
Okay.
he enlists in the Army National Guard. That decision basically shaped the next 2 decades of his life, right?
Wow. Yeah.
And he rises through the ranks,
Yeah.
becomes command sergeant major. We've already talked about how impressive that is.
Right.
But what's really interesting is how that military background influenced his approach to policy later on,
Yeah.
especially when it comes to veterans affairs.
Right. Because this is a guy who doesn't just talk about supporting veterans.
Exactly.
He's been there.
He's lived it.
He understands it firsthand.
And you see that in his work, like expanding the GI Bill. That wasn't just some political move for him, that was personal.
Right.
He served for 24 years. He knows the challenges veterans face when they come home. And he used that experience to fight for policies that would actually help them.
So we've got this picture of Walz, right?
Yeah.
Small town kid, military leader. You'd think the next logical step is like, politics.
Right. Makes sense. Yeah.
But instead, he goes and becomes a high school teacher
A high school teacher, can you imagine?
and a football coach.
Who does that? It's incredible.
What is going on?
It's definitely an unexpected twist.
It is.
But when you think about it, teaching, kind of like politics, it requires you to understand people.
Yeah.
You got to communicate effectively.
Yeah.
You got to wrangle, shall we say, big personalities sometimes.
That's a good way to put it.
Right.
You have to be able to handle a room full of teenagers, that's for sure.
Exactly.
I mean, talk about a change of pace, right?
Right.
Going from like this structured military environment to a room full of teenagers,
Totally.
that's got to be a whole different kind of leadership challenge.
Oh, yeah.
What do you think it was that drew him to teaching?
It's a good question.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe it was that desire to serve, right?
Yeah.
Which we see throughout his entire career.
Right.
It just took a different form for a while.
Interesting.
Or maybe he just really wanted to, like, shape young minds,
Yeah, make a difference.
prepare the next generation. But whatever the reason, it definitely gave him this valuable inside look at how education works,
Oh, absolutely.
which we see come up later when he's making policy as a congressman and governor.
That's true, yeah. Okay, so we've got this fascinating mix of experiences, right?
Yeah.
Military leader, educator, and then in 2006, boom, he jumps into the political ring,
Here we go.
runs for Congress as a Democrat.
Big move.
But not just any district.
Mhm.
He picks a largely rural, pretty conservative district in Minnesota.
Yeah. What was he thinking?
That's what I want to know. Like, how did this guy, who, on paper at least,
Right.
doesn't exactly scream, shoo-in Democrat, how does he win in a district like that?
Well, that's where his reputation for, like, Pragmatism
Okay.
and being able to work with anybody comes in. To win in that kind of district,
Yeah.
he couldn't just rely on like partisan politics, you know?
Right.
He had to connect with people on a personal level.
Right. Build bridges.
Exactly. Understand where they were coming from. Find that common ground.
Yeah. Makes sense.
Yeah.
So he gets to Congress.
You made it.
What are some of the things he was able to accomplish during that time? Like, did this whole bipartisanship thing, did it actually work? Did it actually translate into results?
It totally did, and this is where his record gets really interesting.
Okay, let's hear it.
So he's on the House Committee for Veterans Affairs,
Makes sense.
right? And he keeps fighting for policies like that GI Bill expansion we talked about.
Right.
But then he also gets into things like agricultural policy, which was huge for his district.
Right. Well, largely rural.
Exactly. And he's all about supporting those small family-owned farms.
Okay.
And he often ends up working with, people across the aisle to make it happen.
So it's not just talk. He's actually like rolling up his sleeves,
yeah.
getting in there, making deals, and getting things done for his constituents, regardless of their political affiliation.
Exactly. It's about actually serving the people he represents.
Right. Not just playing politics.
And whether that was like a strategic move or just who he is, I don't know.
Right.
But you can't argue with his effectiveness,
Yeah, that's a good point. Okay, so then he becomes governor of Minnesota,
Governor Walz.
which is a whole other level.
Right.
And it seems like he faces all these crazy challenges almost right away.
Talk about a baptism by fire.
Seriously. Global pandemic,
Yeah.
the murder of George Floyd, and all the unrest that followed.
Right.
Plus, just like the everyday challenges of governing a state.
Like healthcare, education, the economy, all of it.
It's a lot.
It's a lot, and it really puts his leadership to the test,
Yeah, I bet.
Like, think about his handling of COVID, for example. He put some of the strictest lockdown measures in the entire country in place.
That's true, yeah.
And that got him both praise and criticism, of course.
Oh, for sure.
Some people thought he was being too cautious, hurting the economy, and then others thought he was being really proactive.
Right, trying to save lives.
Exactly. It was a no-win situation.
And then you've got the protests after George Floyd's murder.
Right.
Talk about a high-pressure situation. He's calling for police reform and accountability.
Yeah.
But he's also got to address people's concerns about public safety,
Right.
about the potential for violence.
It was a really delicate balance to strike.
It was, and these weren't just like theoretical debates,
Yeah.
right? These were decisions with real consequences
Totally.
for real people's lives.
And that's when you see what kind of leader he really is under that kind of pressure.
Yeah, no kidding. It's easy for us to sit back and,
Armchair quarterback.
exactly, judge from afar. But actually being the one who has to make those decisions,
It's a whole different ballgame.
a whole different story.
Yeah.
And it's not like he was just dealing with crises, right?
Oh, no, absolutely not. I mean, those first few years were rough, but he still made progress in other areas,
Like what?
like healthcare, for one,
Okay.
making it more affordable, especially in rural areas where access can be tough.
Right. Which makes sense given his background.
Exactly. And education was another big one. He pushed for more funding.
Yeah, I remember hearing about that.
He sees that connection between education and, having opportunities, having a good future.
Which, again, makes sense given his own experience as a teacher.
Exactly. It's like all these different parts of his life, the military, teaching, representing that district, it all kind of comes together when he becomes governor.
It's true. It's like all those experiences were preparing him for this role.
Right. And that makes him a really fascinating figure because he doesn't fit neatly into any one box.
Yeah, he really doesn't.
Like, he's a Democrat who wins in a conservative area.
Right.
He's a veteran who's super passionate about education.
Yeah.
He's all about working together, even when everyone else is busy, fighting.
It's true. He's kind of an anomaly.
Yeah.
So where does that leave us? I mean, we've talked about his past.
Yeah.
We've talked about his journey, his leadership style. What's the takeaway?
The $1,000,000 question, right?
Go on.
Like, can he actually keep being so pragmatic in this day and age?
Yeah.
I mean, can you really be a bridge builder when it seems like everyone else is, grabbing their pitchforks?
Yeah, and that's not just a question about Tim Walz, is it? I mean, that feels relevant for all of us.
Oh, absolutely, 100%.
Like, how do we navigate this increasingly divided world?
Yeah, how do we even talk to each other when it feels like everyone's retreating to their own corners?
Exactly. It's tough.
It's really tough, and I don't have the answers, but I do think Walz's story offers some, food for thought.
Okay, I like that.
He reminds us that good leadership isn't about fitting in, right?
Right.
It's about listening to people even when you disagree with them.
trying to see where they're coming from.
Exactly. And finding those moments, even if they're small, where you can actually work together.
Because ultimately, we're all in this thing together, right?
We are, whether we like it or not.
Whether we like it or not. That's a good way to put it. Well, on that note, I think we've done a pretty deep dive on Tim Walz.
We covered a lot of ground.
We did.
Yeah.
From small town Nebraska to the governor's mansion.
It's quite a journey.
It really is. And hopefully our listeners now have a better understanding of the man behind the title,
Absolutely.
the things that shaped his worldview, and the challenges he faces as governor.
And hopefully it makes people think, right?
I hope so. About leadership,
Yeah.
about the political climate, about what it means to try and find common ground these days.
Exactly. Those are the important conversations to be having.
Couldn't agree more. So until next time, thanks for listening, everybody. And remember, keep asking those tough questions. Keep trying to understand each other. We'll be back soon with another deep dive.